Modern job sites couldn't function without the use of material handling equipment. We use this equipment every day, all the time. But with moving parts, mass, momentum, and heavy loads, this equipment can be dangerous, especially when it's not in proper working order. That's why inspecting material handling equipment is so important. Pre-use inspections of the equipment don't take long and can help identify problems that may not be obvious before it's too late. It's best to inspect material handling equipment at the beginning of each shift. The pre-use inspection is meant to be a quick but careful check for problems that can cause injury or inconvenience if they aren't fixed. The problems could be anything from bad wiring, loose connections between parts, or an empty gas tank on large equipment, to knots, kinks, and burns on smaller rigging equipment. Generally, a pre-use inspection should include two steps. Visually examine the equipment from the ground up and test the equipment's operation before putting a load on it. It's a good idea to use a checklist when you perform an inspection. That way you can make sure you've checked everything you need to and you can report any issues you come across. Use the checklist from the equipment's manufacturer or one developed specifically for the equipment you'll be using so you can identify the specific things to check for on that particular model. If you do find a problem with any equipment, it needs to be fixed by a qualified person. Let's take a look at how to perform quick pre-use inspections of some of the equipment we use all the time. Because they're simple to operate, it's easy to take jacks for granted. But these are heavy pieces of machinery that can cause serious injury, especially since there's no cage to protect the operator. The visual inspection starts with the wheels. Look for cuts and gouges. Make sure connections between the wheel and the jack are tight. Check the forks. They should be level with no cracks or bends. Look for obvious problems with the hydraulic system, making sure everything is lubricated and nothing is too worn. Check the handguards to make sure they're secure. Make sure the jack is operating properly before you pick up any loads. Check the drive operations and steering. You should be able to smoothly move in all directions. When you're using a powered jack, make sure the battery is charged and the connection is solid. No wires should be loose or exposed. Test the horn. Check the load handling operations by moving the forks to their maximum height. Test the telescoping abilities if the jack has them. When you're finished, return the forks to the neutral position. Inspecting a forklift is similar to inspecting a jack, but there are a few more steps on the checklist. Look for excessive wear, nail punctures, cuts, splits, and bulges in the tires. Make sure the lug nuts are secure on each tire. Check the forks. Finally, check the boom, frame, and overhead guard for damage. Look at the carriage for broken or cracked weld points and obvious damage. Inspect the hydraulics for loose fittings, damaged cylinders, or leaking fluids. Next, check all fluid levels. Hydraulic fluid, oil, gas, and radiator fluid should all be full. Look at the ground under the forklift to make sure nothing's leaking. After the visual inspection, test the forklift's operation. Start it and check the gauges. Check the brakes, steering, horn, and backup alarm. If anything feels, sounds, or looks out of place, make a note. Cycle the frame leveling function to make sure there's no air in the system, then level the machine. raise the boom to eye level and extend and retract it. Finally, raise the boom to maximum height and return things to neutral positions before use. If you're using an electric forklift, make sure the battery is charged and the connections are tight. Remember, if you find any problems during your inspection, the equipment needs to be checked out by a qualified person before anyone uses it. This is important and can save lives. Manually driven lifts like roustabouts and roller lifts can help one man do the work of a whole crew. But with that extra efficiency comes an extra threat. There's no one to help you if the equipment fails. Start from the ground up by checking the wheels and locks so you know the lift will be stable when you need it to be. Work your way up the machine, looking for dents and other noticeable problems. Inspect the chains, slings, and wire ropes to make sure each is free of kinks, knots, or noticeable damage. Make sure the moving parts are lubricated. These include the mast hoist, load hoist, and pulleys. Make sure cover plates are secured and there's no rust or decay. Finally, check the lift's operations. Make sure all parts are aligned and working properly before picking up a load. Test the ratchet brake mechanisms and make sure the mast is secure. Cranes are the most complex type of material handling equipment. They handle the heaviest loads and they have the most moving parts. Check the tires or tread if it's a heavy-duty or all-terrain crane. Inspect the carriage and body for dents, bends, and damage. Make sure all guard belts are in place and moving parts are lubricated. The levels of fuel, hydraulic fluid, oil, brake fluid, and coolant should be full, and there should be no leaks from tanks, lines, or valves. Visually inspect all hydraulic systems, moving parts, and safety devices to ensure there are no obvious problems. Inspect hooks, load lines, trolley, bridge, and boom. Chains, wire rope, running rope, and standing rope must be in good condition with no frays, twists, or damage. Remember to make notes on your checklist. Start the crane and check the gauges. Test all alarms and emergency stop features, then test the controls and brakes. If everything checks out, return the crane to a neutral position and load it up. For the most part, the pre-use inspection of all hoists is the same, but be sure to use the manufacturer's checklist or a checklist created specifically for the hoist you're using. This will ensure that you check everything you need to for that specific model. First, make sure the hoist is properly secured. There should be no apparent damage to the supporting structure or trolley. No matter what kind of hoist you're using, give it a good visual inspection. Look for worn, cracked, corroded, or loose parts. Make sure no load-bearing components have been damaged. Check the load chain for kinks, twists, or other damage. And inspect the hook and latches for deformation, chemical damage, cracks, and wear. Check all safety devices to make sure they're in good working order. Then check the sheaves, reeving, and drums to make sure they're lubricated properly and show no excess wear or tear. After the visual inspection, check the hoist's operation. Make sure the motions are smooth. There should be no hesitations, vibrations, or unusual noises, and all of the controls should work. If everything checks out, you're ready to go. Rigging accessories like slings, chains, and hooks are often attached to other equipment and usually carry a heavy load, so it's important to make sure they're safe to use before you load them up. Start by checking the load limit to make sure it's strong enough for the job. This can be found in the information from the manufacturer and sometimes on the equipment itself. Always stay within the load limit. It can save lives. Pre-use inspections are similar for most of this equipment. You'll want to look for any signs of damage or weakness. Even a single chain link or a few strands of broken wire rope can be the difference between a secure load and an accident. When inspecting wire rope slings, look for broken wires. Don't use the wire rope if you see 5 or more broken wires in the whole rope or 3 broken wires in any single strand. Also look for abrasions, heat damage, and a noticeable reduction in diameter. For natural rope and slings made of synthetic fibers like nylon, look for abnormal wear and damage along the whole length. This includes powdered fiber between strands, broken or cut fibers, discoloration or rotting, and variations in the size of strands. And make sure there are no knots in the sling. They weaken it and increase the chance it could break. Many nylon slings have a red warning thread embedded in the weave. If the red thread is exposed, it means the sling is worn out and shouldn't be used. If you don't see the red thread, you should still check the sling for other damage. On synthetic webbing, look for snags, punctures, cuts and tears, broken or worn stitches, distorted fittings, or heat damage like burns, melting, or charring. On chain falls and steel slings, check for stretching, grooving, and twisted or bent links. Look for gouges, corrosion pits, weld splatter, and cracks. Every link must be solid for the sling to be safe. On rigging hooks, the hook and latch should be strong and secure. We depend on material handling equipment every day, so it has to be in proper operating condition. That's why a pre-use inspection of the equipment is always a good idea. Also, some equipment requires annual certification. Check local and state regulations to see if this applies to the equipment you're using. Whatever equipment you're inspecting, it starts with a thorough visual inspection from the ground up. Then, test the operation and make sure it's operating properly before loading it. Use a checklist to make sure you're inspecting all the critical parts. If you find any problems, take the equipment out of service so a trained technician can look at it. Do your part to keep yourself and your co-workers safe. After all, we trust this equipment with more than the load it carries. We trust it with our lives.